Welcome to Casting Light, everyone. I'm Jayla Mamadova, and we have with us today Cate Long. Cate Long is the leading national commentator on the debt of Puerto Rico. She accurately wrote in March 2012 that the Puerto Rico government would become insolvent. She founded Puerto Rico Clearinghouse, which is a research service for bondholders to stay informed of legal and legislative efforts to restructure the debt of Puerto Rico. She also developed and led open source project for the reform of financial markets during the creation of the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Act. She has extensive experience working on the regulatory and legislative issues related to the oversight of credit rating agencies and exchange trading for fixed income. Cate, thank you so much and welcome again. Thank you so much for joining this initiative. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jalen.
In starting off, Cate, and actually we received several questions from viewers that were so interested in learning about your background and what the path looked like post-college in becoming a lead commentator on Puerto Rico and growing your media presence.
Sure. So I have an undergraduate degree in painting and drawing. And then the first job I had out of college, I actually worked in a research and development lab doing materials development for solar projects and patent research. And then I spent a number of years in the textile business and ended up trading in China and going to China for a amount. And then I came into the financial business and started working in the fixed income markets and worked for a British bank called Barings. Now part of ABN AMRO, and this, over time worked extensively in fixed income. I worked on a project. I've been working for a long time on a project for retail fixed income, which I patented, and the idea there before commercializing it, I was going to wait for interest rates to go up, for the Fed to allow interest rates to go up, which has never happened. So I ended up working at Reuters through several other iterations of stuff, including what you mentioned. And at Reuters, they knew I'd worked in fixed income, and they asked me to write about the municipal bond market. And I didn't know anything about it, so I just started writing. And became, just happened to read the financials for Puerto Rico, as you said. And, I can do enough financial analysis to see when a creditor or a debtor is, not doing well, and just made what turned out to be a big market call. And then just stayed with it all along, working on the side of my patented project, which hopefully I'll get back to here at some point. So Puerto Rico has been going on for me for 8 years. This is 8 years I've worked on it.
That's amazing. And during your time at Reuters, so the muni blog, that was an invitation from Reuters, or was that your own initiative? And how did that progress? And why the focus on Puerto Rico? Did you anticipate getting so much attention?
So no, actually, the guys that ran the Reuters operation saw me on Twitter talking about fixed income, which I did, and that was part of this work I did. You mentioned on Dodd-Frank. There's not many people can write about fixed income markets, and they just said, would you like to do this daily column? I was like, yeah, sure. And municipal bonds are a really odd part of the municipal market. They're very bespoke. There's really no standards, and they trade in relatively small sizes. And they're issued in relatively small sizes. So it was really just for like a year and a half or 2 years, just kind of exploring the market and getting to know people. I had a good, deep understanding of the regulatory side of the business and credit rating, as you mentioned. And then I just added that piece, the municipal piece. And this, I also covered 7 bankruptcies, municipal bankruptcies while writing. So Detroit and Stockton and Viejo, there was, this series of bankruptcies. So I learned, what municipal bankruptcy is, which is different. And then so Puerto Rico came along, and I was like, oh, maybe I should write about this. Thinking, one part of this we didn't mention was that I ended up working very closely with Congress as they developed the law, which is the framework for this debt restructuring in Puerto Rico to be done. And I gave them a lot of input based on, being an outside observer in the other bankruptcies. And the intent was, and one thing I asked to be added to the law was this consensual restructuring piece, which is used in sovereign debt restructurings, which is non-court restructuring where everybody sits around a table and bangs on each other for a few months instead of asking the judge to, litigate it. And with that, I thought, they put it in the law, and my thought was that they would be able to do that in, basically like 2 years. Now we're 4 years in and they're still litigating. So it's been a disappointment, a huge disappointment. So.
Okay, it seems like for those that are trying to enter the space, and a part of Casting Light's mission is for mid-career professionals or a younger audience that's trying to venture into any specific industry. So it seems like you were able to create your own niche. And so just taking a step back, what would be your advice in terms of finding the right niche, or being able to scope out the right opportunities, especially when it comes to of writing, maybe a blog, or starting off with writing a blog, building a media presence? What would your advice be on that front?
Yeah, so it's absolutely, well, I'll tell you, in fixed income, it's absolutely a case you need to know people, or people need to be, get to know you. And I did have a blog, which was very well read on regulatory stuff during Dodd-Frank. I did some editing for an institutional roundtable, Greenwich Roundtable. This is early on when I first came in financial services business. And I got to know a lot of people. I worked in an industry group helping move fixed protocol, it's called, which is where we migrated the electronic trading standards from equities into fixed income. Got to know all the dealer banks and all the vendors, and just a lot of people that way and stuff. So I mean, I guess my advice would be absolutely, contribute on social media. Just research things and then write about them. I'll also tell you that the Securities Exchange Commission read my blog very actively, and they were in this iteration where they were doing credit rating agency reform, and I basically would write something, and then a couple weeks later it would show up in a draft rule. And and they had told me they were, I knew they were. If you have an independent point of view, it's really welcome. I mean, a lot of people want to hear it. Generally people are in law firms, so they're advocating on behalf of an exchange or, a dealer bank or something. If you could kind of shoot down the middle and have an independent view just for things that are fair in the market and valuable to market participants, people really want to hear that input. So, I mean, obviously that all presupposes some knowledge of a market, but,
There seems to be a lot of blogs out there. So just in terms of blogs and writing and whatnot. So for someone who's starting early on, I guess what would be the right way of doing so? Should there be a particular audience that's being targeted? And just going off of my own experience, I've been meaning to start a blog for probably the longest of time. And there's always been a hesitation in terms of getting, the right message across, or how to do it the right way. Do you think there's a formula to be going about it? Should the audience that's being targeted, should that be kept in mind? What would you say is kind of the
I would say a lot of the success I had early on was I was writing in response to proposed rules that the SEC was putting out, or FINRA, or in the case of municipal securities, we have a municipal securities rulemaking board. So I was making sort of market comments about things that institutions were doing. And that will create a very high profile, because again, if you're making legitimate observations that should improve with the intent of improving the process, people really pay attention. And sometimes you miss the mark. I mean, I've made comments that I thought later, market structure comments that really didn't pan out, but many of them did, and many of them were adopted into different rules and laws and stuff. So, my feeling is if you have subject matter interest or expertise in something, write on that, write to the people that are doing it, write in reaction or response to the people that are doing it, and they'll pay attention. There's no question. I think a lot of people have made, good career progress by doing that.
With Puerto Rico Clearinghouse, how did you go about establishing it, and what was the path, maybe in starting off with the piece you wrote on Puerto Rico being America's Greece, and the backlash that you received for that article?
Yeah, I was right. So I wrote that piece, and then it offended the then current governor. And so it's kind of hilarious. He had sort of his political henchmen create a website attacking me and like attacking me in the Puerto Rico media. And they called me like, they said I was part of Occupy Wall Street. And I thought, man, I'm part of like the system. Like you, I mean, it was so off the mark, right? It was like ridiculous. And also my feeling was, having a platform at the media company like Reuters, if you attack someone and you hit them square on, they'll come back at you. If you miss, they don't care. They just like usually let it go. But I can think of time I did the same thing with the governor of Pennsylvania on fracking fees. He had, given away like a ton of money by this thing he did, basically suppressing any, severance fees they went put on fracking. And, it's just, so from there, let me just say in Puerto Rico's case, I wrote for 2 more years, and I spent a lot of time studying the financials and the bond, there's 18 classes of debt there. So in the issue in Puerto Rico, a lot of sovereigns have, or, municipal issuers have a lot of classes of debt, but in Puerto Rico's case, they have a lot of cross claims. So, one entity would have a claim on another government entity or maybe an outside entity. So there was just a lot of minutia to it. But then once it was obvious that they were going to default just based on what the governor was doing, I asked a Puerto Rican lawyer who I was close to see if he wanted to create a newsletter service essentially for creditors. And the idea was that we were going to monitor the local courts, and then the bankruptcy obviously went into, based on Congress creating this law, went into federal court. So we didn't have to translate all the documents. I mean, our first thought was all of it was going to be done in Spanish, but it was done in English. So that's it. And then you basically just tell people, clients that are interested. I mean, it's a pretty relatively small audience for this because, institutions own the debt. I talk, occasionally to a lot of retail investors just out of, just to help them out. But, it's really institutions that own the debt. So, well, I've been in there a long time. A lot of them came in recently and stuff. So, and I also spent a lot of time updating Congress. That's, the other side of it. Because, they have not done anything on a statutory basis since 2016, but they're always wondering if they should step in and do something because it's generally a mess. So.
Kate, I remember when my company and I had reached out to you to work on Puerto Rico to have you speak to institutional investors, there was a huge gap. We were really struggling in finding an expert who can speak on Puerto Rico. And this may sound as a very simple question, but it did come as a shock to us as to why there was such a gap in the market. Usually when we're able to find experts, 3 to 4 on average for any particular given subject on Puerto Rico, it was very, very difficult. Right. And we received amazing client feedback, obviously working with you, but why do you think that is so? Why is it because of the complex nature of understanding municipal bonds, or why has the focus there and expertise there been so few?
Yeah, so in bankruptcy, there's been thousands of corporate bankruptcies, but in the last 15 years, there's only been like 10, really only 7 or 8 municipal bankruptcies. The law is different. But in a corporate bankruptcy, the creditors, the people who own the debt or the equity, whatever, control the process. In a municipal bankruptcy, the debtor, the government itself, controls the process. So it's really almost, beyond the complexity of Puerto Rico's finances itself, and the fact it's all done in Spanish, and this thing with Congress imposing this law, it's just, there's not a lot of experts in municipal bankruptcy, and the guys that really know it, they get hired to litigate in the bankruptcy, so they obviously can't talk about it, right? And then, you have the services that, Debtwire and Reorg and those guys and stuff, they cover all the bankruptcies. That's just like their standard operation. And they do a good job for the most part covering Puerto Rico, but they can't like go out and do, contract research and stuff for people. So
that's so
basically
the demand for Puerto Rico Clearinghouse. You must have been seeing a lot of demand for your services, correct?
Yeah, sure. You got people in the litigation that have debt that's in the bankruptcy, and then you get a lot of people, investors that also considering investments on the island. Want to buy big property on So Puerto Rico itself is kind of a black box in terms of the economy there, the macro situation. It nominally has, U.S. laws, but then they have their own set of laws for a lot of like banking and stuff like that. So, yeah, I mean, and then you get the hurricane, right? And then, people never even thought of Puerto Rico, right? So suddenly interest spikes. That was actually positive in the long run. I mean, it was a horrific event, but, it's like Puerto Rico's off the chart. It's like not, it's not like Illinois or another, a state or something. So. Yeah, definitely. And then everybody kind of takes their position, right? So 2016, everybody could see it coming before that. We all knew it. And then people, they amass positions, the creditors, they get in different positions in the debt stack, and then they start litigating and stuff or negotiating, whatever.
Have you seen a change in the way investors are approaching municipal bonds in this period of the pandemic? Has anything changed in that light?
Yeah. Well, even before that, as yields were really low, interest rates were really low, and depending on the tax treatment for like insurance companies, property casualty insurance, different kind of insurance companies, and pensions typically don't buy municipal bonds, but there's been this massive demand. And then we've had over the last, I would say probably also 8 years, we've had this overseas demand. So you get investors, outside of the institutional investors outside the United States, because the yields are in many cases, even without the tax, pickup, the tax exemption pickup, the yields are much better. And for guys like that, for investors like that, the states are pretty liquid. So just say the state of California issues general obligation bonds, they come out in, $1 billion or $2 billion issues. So the guys can trade in and out of that. I mean, Texas has come with like $9 billion short-term paper, so people can trade in and out of that. So it attracts institutional investors. The yields are very favorable in many cases, and the credits, they're very safe. I mean, it's not like you have default risk for the majority of them. I mean, there's only one Puerto Rico that's a mess, right? And although Illinois and New Jersey and Connecticut or whatever are a mess, they're not like a mess like Puerto Rico. So,
Cate, so and again, going back to the the career side of things, and for young professionals trying to establish themselves in the field, you just said that you've been closely working with Congress. How did that evolve? Is that as a response to the work that you've been doing, the writing that you've been doing, or have you at any point in your career actively sought out to do work with government agencies by yourself, or do you feel like that just arose as you develop expertise in this space?
Yeah, so these patents that I have on credit ratings standardization and visualization was something I started working on a long time ago. And it was around the time that Enron blew up and WorldCom and stuff, and they went bankrupt. And as a consequence, Congress started reviewing the role of credit rating agencies in the financial system. And they started a process, and then they asked the SEC to start a process. So I started writing comments to the SEC, and a lot of what I wrote, they put in the law. So they also it came back to Congress in 2005 and 6, and I started, talking to congressional staff then. It was a very complex topic. Again, it's like a very niche-y, complex, structural issue about financial markets. And they loved it. I mean, I had tremendous success talking to offices because, again, I was neutral, right? I just wanted the system to work well. I didn't have an axe to grind. I wasn't there for JP Morgan or, Goldman or any of those guys. So, so then I just did the same thing in Dodd-Frank. I actually moved to Washington, spent 8 months there on the Hill, all over, because Dodd-Frank was very unusual that it was developed in 4 committees on both sides, in both chambers. Generally when you get a law, when you're doing it, like credit rating agency law was done in the Senate Banking Committee for the most part, and House Financial Services. to a lesser extent. But Dodd-Frank was done in like 8 committees. So that was like a ton of work just to keep everybody up to date. And then when Puerto Rico came along, I was like, oh God, I know how to talk to these people. So I just started writing white papers and giving them to people. And I happened to connect with the guys that were writing the law in the House Natural Resources Committee. And, the first thing they asked, they're like, who are you here representing? I said, nobody. I'm just like telling you what it is. And they, from then on, they just trusted me. And, I was able to have a lot of input in the process. So, I mean, you just basically in DC, like most things, and, most things you just disclose your interest, right? And, even on a blog, and you go back to your point about writing blogs, if you're pitching for somebody, if you're advocating for somebody, just say it. I mean, at least people get, the point of view that you're coming from. If it's just your own opinion, just say it too. It's based on your market knowledge, just say it. So.
Okay, do you think the appeal came because you did not have any representation, or you weren't acting as any part of any group?
Yeah. Oh, 100%. I mean, this is classic. Like in Puerto Rico, you had all these guys that owned general obligation debt, which is this big class of debt, and you had all these guys owning COFINA, right? They had with these hedge funds guys, they had their attorneys running around. They had all the officers confused because one guy, the Geo guy said, we have priority, and the COFINA guy says, no, you have to write. And I said, look, I said, they're both of equal priority. I mean, the way the law is, they all, the way they are in the market, they are basically pari passu, they're equal. So I just said, when it was stalemated, I just said, treat them both in the law equally. And that's what they did. So, I mean, I wasn't there for the Geo guys or COFINA guys. I was just telling them what it was. So. And that solved a lot of problems for them. So they loved it, right? They were really happy with that. So.
For something like this, is it key to be in Washington? Do you think it was important for you to go?
I didn't live in Washington for Puerto Rico. I did for Dodd-Frank. I mean, Dodd-Frank was massive. You have to understand, that's like an 800-page bill. Covered derivatives, bank capital ratios, liquidity coverage ratios. I mean, it also is integrated with the international regulatory framework, which is the big thing I help congressional staff is by amassing like all the, from like the Australian and European Union, like all the regulatory frameworks from the different, different jurisdictions. So, but in terms of Puerto Rico, or even now, you just basically send emails, right? You just send notes or I mean, it's rare you talk to people. It's more you just send them information. The thing with Congress is they're just like information hounds. They're very smart people, a lot of staff, and they just want input from everybody, and then they weigh it, right? They just want as many perspectives on a complex issue as possible. So, I mean, you can go, and occasionally I go and say hi to everybody, but it's just, easier to just email or, basically just email, as I say, or call.
Cate, as you're speaking, I'm utterly in awe that so you've learned all of this basically over the years on the job, and there was never a formal education around the way fixed income markets work or regulatory agencies. Just to clarify, that was all you learned all of that in the process of doing. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I just need to back up and say I did go to an alternative school. The college I graduated from, Goddard in Vermont, is based on John Dewey's principles of learning how to learn, which is essentially they just teach you how to learn stuff and, collect the underlying resources that you need to understand something and then process it, like understand it, right, study it, and then make a product out of it. So really that's the education that I have. Just never stopped doing it. I mean, I love figuring stuff out. I love figuring complex stuff out. So this, that's a product of, how I was educated, really.
I mean, that's amazing, especially when, there's such a focus, or there's such a push to get a formal education around everything.
Right.
It seems like that is the case nowadays. It truly is very inspirational to hear that you had this process of continuous learning.
it's a more classic education, which is the idea that you are able to think and rationalize, right, and to process information. And it's, you know, what the content of the information is not particularly important. I mean, and look, I couldn't go into physics right now and like figure out nuclear fission. I mean, I guess I could if I had enough time, interest. But you know, the idea is that, you know, the resources are out there to understand things, and you just have to be kind of creative. And it's kind of like hacking, right? It's kind of like intellectual hacking, where you just go out and you try and amass, you know, all as broad of, you know, array of resources as you can on a topic. And with the internet, it's really easy now. I mean, it's relatively easy. When I started, you know, we had LexisNexis basically, which was horrible, like, you know, terrible. I mean, compared to what's available now. So,
do you think the opportunities that are there, they're still receptive to this type of to this type of learning on your own? Just because I'm taking from my example, I focus on healthcare at work, but by education, my education is in energy infrastructure and policy. But then somehow I found myself in healthcare, and oftentimes I'll get asked even by clients, "What do you have any formal education in this?" As speaking. So, do you think the landscape has changed in a way where there is still room to establish yourself as an expert, and in many ways, you know, learn, as opposed to, simply put, sometimes even waste time in getting certain certificates and certain processes? Do you think that that opportunity, and do you think that the landscape out there is still receptive to that?
Well, it takes a while to become an expert. So, right, people, yeah, you know, I just, even for myself, have a little bit of patience. And, you know, I think that the society has moved more to credential-based society than when I, you know, came out of college. And I think it depends on the specific field. I do. I mean, I think in your position, you're obviously, you know, working at a very high level, you know, trying to help people understand really complex systems. And, you know, I mean, it could be argued either way, whether, you know, you have to have been a doctor or, you know, run a hospital or something to do what you do. But, you know, my sense is more like, you know, so systems are always changing, right? And so if you can kind of perceive like how the direction systems are changing in, or rules or laws or, you know, whatever, institutions, you know, that's something that will make you an expert. Just studying how something was 10 years ago or a week ago, it's like, okay, fine, like, you know, that's what the internet's for. But you know, taking all that and understanding it, saying healthcare, where's healthcare going, right? What does Congress want to do? What do the Republicans want to do? What do the Democrats, you know? I would say, you know, in your case, you know, if you're willing to put the time in, that's really all you need. Energy is another really complex topic too. So you've already had the experience of working on a complex topic. So.
It's slightly pivoting, but a lot of the questions that we received were really also focused on, what were the challenges in establishing Puerto Rico Clearinghouse? What would you say were some of the lessons learned in the process of, you know, finding and establishing your own research agency?
Well, I can remember making one really bad call with a big creditor, just, you know, misinterpreting the legal documents. So, you know, so they went away. That's what happened. You know, otherwise, I've worked independently before, so it's not really, that part wasn't challenging. I guess it's too, just, you know, I guess like for myself, I always just remember to bill the clients, get, you know, like I'd rather do the work than do the administrative side of the business. And, you know, I already had a pretty good public reputation. So it wasn't like I had to go out and tell people who I was. Do you hear that?
It was just a little pause, but
okay, because it's like let's see if that helps. Yeah, I would say, you know, if you need to promote yourself really more than anything. I mean, I didn't as much because again, I had a pretty big reputation on the topic, but just be willing to promote yourself. And then when you get clients, just work as hard as you can for them. They need help in just figuring out, in the most precise and effective and fast way, what the help they need is, and then getting that done for them. It's just, basically like trying to execute anything well, so.
When we're thinking about, and we talked a little bit about the pandemic, but when you're thinking about the new normal, or what the new normal will look like, I guess once we enter a period of normalization post, hopefully a not so bad second wave, what is your outlook for the municipal bond market? Do you have any comments as to how maybe you're seeing the media landscape changing, because it does feel a little bit more polarized these days?
Yeah.
In terms of those that want to either join Reuters or another news agency and start their careers in that form?
I can't recommend Reuters highly enough. I mean, the only problem I had there is they wanted me to write a daily column on a really boring market. So it was like, it's not so easy, but the quality standards at Reuters are exceptional. In terms of media generally is going through a lot of changes, probably more than any industry, I would say. But getting started with like a Bloomberg, or like a group that has a large journalism core with high standards, I really can't speak highly enough of that. You usually need some other positions, like lower league positions to get in before you get there. But and in terms of the municipal market, almost all cities and states are in pretty good shape. I mean, they're all yelling about needing all this money now from Congress, and they will need some money. But for the most part, it's a pretty healthy market. We're going to have problems with major cities like Chicago and New York, where we're having these exodus of people, and there will be a period of rebalancing where those cities have to rein in the expenses and either raise taxes or borrow money for the short term or something. But it's an old market. It's probably one of the oldest markets in the United States. I mean, they issued bonds to build the Erie Canal and stuff. It's like it's been around a really long time. So, and I would say too, it's just if you know people in dealer banks and you're interested, call them up. If you know anybody that works even on say a commercial mortgage-backed desk at one of the big dealer banks, call them and ask if they know anyone on the muni side, or can they point you over at somebody, and just call them up and ask them. I mean, most people are very flattered when you ask them to talk about themselves. Ditto. So just network, ask people, and then try it. And if it doesn't, after a year you don't like it, stick with it for a year. And if it's not what you like, just figure something else out.
You certainly have, and I, as someone who doesn't have an established Twitter account, there are individuals that I follow, and you're definitely, number one. I have my husband who's a lawyer. He follows you, so we follow you as family. And it is very, it's interesting how social media is very educational, and it can be used as a powerful tool. Yeah. So I'm glad that you're ending in a positive note and saying that those opportunities are present and the media landscape is growing. But I guess just lastly, any bits of advice in terms of key things to be looking out for, and any challenges when it comes to the media landscape?
Well, let me just make a caveat here, is that specialty media is growing, which is covering, niche-y complex stuff. There's really like a ton of demand for that. The general media landscape, which is just that mainstream media, is like going nowhere. I mean, that's declining or contracting because there's too much of it and it's really poor quality for the most part. But if you can dig down into something and provide expert, or consistent high quality writing on it, then there's definitely demand for that. And otherwise, I would say just, I mean, I use Twitter, people use other platforms, but think of it as mini blogging, just, as a chance to, put out your observations, things that are of interest. I mean, I have pretty broad interest, so I tend to, tweet pretty broadly and stuff, but just, view it as a way to put information out, and you'll be shocked at the people that come back and respond. I mean, some are just, no-brainers, but some people are, pretty high level, very engaged, very, very interested in people's opinions about what's going on, so.
Thank you so much for this, Cate. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for this episode of Casting Light. And viewers, please send over any questions you may have. Perhaps if Cate has time, later on we could do a live session and I will direct your questions to Cate Long. Thank you so much, Cate. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jalen. Take care and good luck.